Hello, welcome to the Bible study. My name is Kent Philpott, and we are going through the Gospel of John. It's the fourth Gospel in the Greek Bible, what I like to refer to that instead of the New Testament. The Greek Bible is written in Greek, and there are four Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. John, who wrote this Gospel, was probably a mid-teenager when he started accompanying Jesus with his brother James and others who lived up in the area of Galilee and Judea in the first century, what we call CE, Common Era. And so he is the only apostle to die a natural death. All the rest were killed for their believing in Jesus, and many of them not in nice ways. So here John is writing this gospel. It's figured that he is writing in about the beginning of the 10th decade of the first century. In other words, around 89, 90, 91. He would go on to write three letters, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and the book of Revelation, or otherwise known as the Apocalypse. Apocalypse comes from the Greek and means revelation. This is what we're reading of, and we find John bringing in many details that only somebody who is observing and overhearing events. It's an eyewitness account, the Gospel of John. So it is different from Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Matthew, Mark, and Luke pretty much tell the story blow by blow with Jesus throughout his ministry. John is far more theologically oriented, theme-oriented, and doesn't discuss a lot of the day-by-day things that Jesus did that the other, what we call synoptic Gospels, write. Synoptic, S-Y-N, with, optic, see, to see with the same view. John approaches it differently. So, for that reason, John is a lot more theologically oriented. He's like a preacher. Some think, and I am in agreement, that what we find in the Gospel of John are a series of sermons that he presented either orally or in written form for people. He was on the Isle of Patmos. He was exiled by the Roman government. They were apparently afraid to kill him because of his status, and that he was a great old man and much loved by so many people. I've actually been there, and it's an incredible place to see. All right. So we're going to go and look at one story. It's called The Plot to Kill Jesus. The plot to kill Jesus. We're starting in John chapter 11 and verse 45. Many of the Jews, therefore, it's talking about the Jewish people. I have thought that maybe people, when they hear those words, it sounds racist. It's not intended by that at all. John himself Jewish. All the 12 were Jewish, and so we have I have a situation here where I'd like to explain that these people are Jewish people. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did, believed in him. Now notice the word many. Many. You would think that maybe they all would believe after seeing a man raised from the dead, a man who had been in a tomb for 4 days and come out. There he is, the same old Lazarus that they always knew, and he was alive and he had been dead, and there he is. And it says many, but it doesn't say all. That's one of the troubling mysteries of Christianity that no Christian has yet solved or really come to terms with. I still battle over the idea. I would like everyone to be saved, everyone to know Jesus, but that's not how it is. It has never been how it is. Actually, there's only a few. Jesus said, many there be that enter in the wide and easy path, but straight in the gate and narrow is the way that leads to life. And then Jesus says, and few there be that find it. It has to be revealed. You can't find it. It has to be revealed. It's always been that way. Always been that way. Much to our chagrin and pain. And pain. Many of you will understand what I'm talking about and will experience sometimes the same sadness that I actually experience even right now. And I think of family members and good friends who are not safe in Christ. So, verse 46, but some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. They were not going to give a good report. It's going to be fear-based. We'll see in a little bit, fear-based. So it says, that you got this conjunction, but. Yeah, there were those who believed, but some. They went to the Pharisees, probably thinking they were doing the right thing, that they could understand that such an event that would be widely reported, and right there in the vicinity of Jerusalem, leading people experienced the most incredible of miracles. They knew it would be trouble. And you think, why couldn't they see? Why couldn't they trust in Jesus? We call it the doctrine of election. God's choosing. God's choosing. I'm going to be talking about that a little bit later, some more. Verse 47. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council together. Now the council consisted of 70 people. The head of it was the high priest, who's Caiaphas, and we're going to be meeting Caiaphas in a moment. And it would have been made up of two different religious parties, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. There was also a third group, very likely, and that would have been tribal leaders, people from various parts of that world that were Jewish and settled in one of the areas given to the sons of Jacob, and were leaders, and they were part of the council. And they said, what are we to do? For this man performs many signs. Instead of being happy and joyous over this event, they were anything but. How could they be so blind, you think? Well, I continue to think of that passage, 2 Corinthians 4:4. The God of this world, meaning, now you see here Satan, the God of this world has blinded the eyes, blinded the minds of those that believe not, lest they should see the glory of the gospel of Christ. There's always an enemy, the prince of darkness, the prince of confusion, the prince of death. We know him as Satan or the devil. Now people think, Philpott, you believe that stuff? I wish I didn't believe it. I wish I was not forced to believe it. But on the basis of pure experience in doing deliverance ministry, I believe. I did not believe it. I spent 2 degrees in psychology before I went to seminary. And when I heard the stuff about demons and Satan, I thought that is very poor psychology, and I'm going to take it upon myself to educate these poor ignorant Christians. I literally thought that. It troubled me. I almost dropped out of seminary. I thought these people are crazy. They don't understand mental issues, mental illness issues. They don't understand addiction. They don't understand the change in brain chemistry and so on. I thought those things. I thought I was quite superior. Little did I know that I would spend many decades doing what we call deliverance ministry, casting demons out of people. I've done it by the hundreds. I know you think, oh, that's mild-mannered fellow Philpott, that old dude. Well, I'm sorry. I have to tell you the truth. And Christians, thousands of them, have done that for years. And what are we to do? Verse 48, if we let him go on like this. Now that if is a third class, and we may not be able to do anything about it. If we let him go like this, everyone will believe in him. We don't want people believing in Jesus. Come on. We don't want people believing in Jesus. Fall prey to that superstitious nonsense, pie in the sky, by and by stuff. Come on. Everyone will believe, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. Okay. That last phrase helps to explain things. There had been a series of people who had risen up in rebellion against Rome. A number of them. The final one would occur in 66 CE, Common Era. A big battle, big warfare, rebellion against Rome. 4 years later, Rome trashes Jerusalem, tears down the temple. End of the nation of Israel until 1948. Still no temple built. So they're afraid. Here's this guy. Yeah, he's just a guy, young man. He's only got 12 followers, and they're not much. No big deal. But they see in the fact that Jesus could raise the dead, they're not just dealing with a rebel, not just a guy who's going to pick up a sword and think he's going to attack Rome. Verse 49, but one of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. Let me tell you a little bit about Caiaphas. I know you wanted to know that just in case. But Caiaphas was high priest for 18 years, beginning in 18 through 36 CE. In 107 years of the high priesthood until 70 CE, when it was all ended, there were 28 different high priests. It's interesting that Caiaphas was appointed high priest by the Roman governor that preceded Pilate. And then, interestingly enough, he was fired by the Roman governor that succeeded Pilate. So here we go. So this is taking place when Caiaphas was high priest. His father-in-law was a man named Annas, who was high priest from 6 to 15 CE, and then, of course, Caiaphas took over after some short period. So here's what Caiaphas, who's a high priest, he's going to say to him. He says, "You know nothing at all." Starts out with an insult. You know nothing at all. Nor do you understand that it's better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish. Now, that is extremely interesting. I want to read again what Caiaphas said, and you can see it here on the screen. Nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish. Now, if I were to read nothing else, I would say Caiaphas is saying we need to kill him, because if we don't kill him, we're going to have a mess on our hands, and that we could lose our whole nation. They could just take us over. as it was, Rome allowed them to conduct their own affairs. The Sanhedrin, they were in charge. Yeah, the governor, what was residing in Caesarea on the coast of the Mediterranean, not that far away, was the ultimate authority, but they could lose it all. They could lose it all. And that's what they were afraid of. The whole nation. There's kind of a double meaning here. There's a sense of irony here. I don't grasp all that it was. By the way, you asked the question, how do we know what was said in the Sanhedrin? Isn't it John just making this stuff up, just writing a story? Well, no. There were two members of the Sanhedrin who became believers in Jesus, who may at this time already been. One was Nicodemus. We encountered him in chapter 3, where Jesus said to him, "You must be born again." The other was Joseph of Arimathea, who went to Pilate and was able to get Jesus' body and buried Jesus in his own tomb. So there's two members, at least, of the Council of Israel who were followers of Jesus. And so we have no trouble about knowing how we got this information here. Then, verse 51, we have John speaking to us again. He's explaining things. John, the writer of this gospel. Verse 51, he says, "He did not say this of his own accord, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but also to gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad." I wish I understood this. This is a very troubling passage in terms of grasping it. John seems to say that as the high priest, he's inspired to utter these words, and especially that that he should die for one man should die for the people. Because that is a biblical truth. One would die for the people. Would die for the people of Israel. And I'm going to explain the idea of Israel in just a moment. So that's what John seems to be saying, that there's a double meaning, or that the words of Caiaphas can be taken in two ways. One, the Roman interference, or referring to the sacrifice of the Passover lamb, the one dying in our place, Jesus on the cross, taking our sin upon himself. That is a real possibility, and I think that's probably what's going on here. Now, the nation referring to is Israel. And who is Israel? The great-grandson of Abraham, the son of Isaac, named Jacob, wrestled with God in a very interesting passage in Genesis, with very ancient use of allegory, simile, and metaphor, in my view, wrestles with God. And Israel is a word that means someone who wrestled with God and essentially lost the match. That's Israel. Those who fought with God and lost. They've tangled with God. Israel. And Israel is the chosen of God. We see this very clearly in Scripture. The nation is the chosen people of God. I have a friend, Mitch Glazer, who's the president of a ministry called Chosen People Ministries. And you understand the name. But every person who becomes a Christian, I am a part, like myself, I am a part of Israel. Everybody who is a Christian is a part of that nation. That's my view. It's not all Christians' view. But a lot of us have a tendency to view that. The moment you become a Christian, you're part of Israel, the people of God. There's one people of God. There's one church. There's one flock. There's one shepherd. Scattered all over. But everybody who is truly born again of the Spirit of God, who has Christ in them, belongs to that church, that flock, that Israel. That's my view. Verse 53, so from that day on, they made plans to put him to death. They would have had no idea what they were doing. They would have seemed to have been doing the right thing. It would seem to them that they are acting for the people. They are defending the nation. They are protecting their institutions. This is how they would have felt about it. They would have gone about it with zeal. So they made plans to put him to death, and they would succeed. Verse 54. Jesus therefore, now notice the therefore, he got word of this. How? Well, I mentioned Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. Probably insider info. So he no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from there to the region near the wilderness to a town called Ephraim, or I can't pronounce it right anyway, and there he stayed with the disciples. It would have been northeast, about 15 miles northeast from Jerusalem. So, and many people think that this is where Jesus put it into high gear, his teaching of his disciples. So he did not walk openly. Was it out of fear? Probably not. But he knew what was coming. He knew that the cross was coming. And he's taking steps that he's not going to be killed in another way by a mob or a group of Roman soldiers seeking him out, being told that he is an insurrectionist and is out to attack Rome. And he and his little band, and the Romans just slaughter them very quickly. So Jesus takes care to hide, not to walk openly. Verse 55. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand. I'm going to take a moment, because I have the time, to explain what a Passover is. This, by the way, is the third Passover mentioned in the Gospel of John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke only speak of one. The Passover was one of the pilgrimage feasts where all the able-bodied Jewish people who could afford to come to Jerusalem to celebrate it would. The Passover was when, in Egypt, God instructed the Jewish slaves in Egypt to sacrifice a lamb, take the blood of the lamb and put it on the top of the door and on the side of the door. And that sacrifice of the lamb, the death angel would pass over, and no death would come to the house where the blood was. But to the house where there was no blood, the firstborn died. Very interesting. The firstborn died. And they were to celebrate that throughout, and the Jewish people have done it, and we've done it as well. The Passover Feast. And this Passover Feast was at hand, and so many went up from the country. Now this means from all over that part of the world. They were coming to Jerusalem for the Passover to purify themselves. They had to get there early before it started to offer the certain sacrifices, shave their heads perhaps, wash their clothes, all those things that they had to do. Unhappily, Judaism has become a religion of something you do. When I go to the mosque on Friday at Juma prayers, and I have a little book that I read, it describes all the things that are required to do, all that you have to do. A religion of doing. Went up from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to pacify themselves. Now, notice it says they were looking for Jesus. This is a very interesting time. They were looking for Jesus. Word would spread very rapidly. So many people would come in. Jerusalem would go from a city of normally 100,000 to 1 million plus. I saw some record that said that there was a Passover after this that 3 million people came. I don't know the accuracy of that, but all of these people in what we called a caravan, great masses of people moving together, would come into Jerusalem. They were looking for Jesus and saying to one another as they stood in the temple, "What do you think? That he will not come to the feast at all?" Well, they thought that, well, a guy that could raise people from the dead and walk on water and calm storms and multiply food, something fierce, break all the laws of physics, raise people from the dead, heal the blind, the paralyzed, etc. We want to see him. Word had spread. There was a kind of a dangerous excitement in the air. And for those who do not recognize Jesus as who he is, you can understand their concern. Verse 57. Now the chief priest and the Pharisees. Notice it says the chief priest. This is referring to the Sadducees. That the Sadducees and the Pharisees were odds together. They were at odds with each other. But they're teaming up now. They're teaming up against Jesus. Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was, and it's a third-class condition, they probably would. They probably knew where he was. They figured there was people who knew where he was. He should let them know so that they might arrest him. So what we're doing, we're moving to the end of Jesus' public ministry. Jesus' ministry never quits, goes on now, but his earthly ministry was just about over. I guess maybe you could count 6 days. It's interesting that this is real history about real people, about real places, much of it described in sources outside of the Bible. It is not the result of visions, dreams, impartations, none of that, but real events happening in real time and conveyed to us in written form and in preached form. So that's what we encounter when we look at the Scripture. So long.